you mentioned a little bit about the Indian Loan Guarantee Program.
It was established in the Indian Finance Act sometime after 1974. It was to encourage private lenders to lend in Indian country. It was a more generous loan guarantee than, say, the SBA's. I think the SBA is 85%. The Indian loan guarantee is 90%. The loan has to benefit either a tribal lands or on or near and benefit a tribal community. That could potentially allow $450 million worth of private financing to be guaranteed. Very special. It's unique to Indian country.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Native Edge. I am Chris James. I'm here with my producer,
Michaela Garcia.
You don't necessarily see Michaela, but you can hear her. I also have our comms director here in the room, Louis Lau. He doesn't have a microphone on, but he did this a huge shout out to Louis. Louis and I have known each other for well over a decade. He's been doing some great work with the National Center for a very long time. So really great to have him as our comms director to help put this podcast together. So you get a little bit behind the scenes of folks. So Michaela, you and I were talking about this earlier today. We are in Washington, D.C. This is a series. We're doing a Washington, D.C. series, so we're recording the podcast. Unfortunately, Yvette is in Arizona. She's been doing some amazing work running around the country and doing tourism, and she also, this week, was in Oklahoma. She moderated a panel somewhere in Oklahoma, which was pretty awesome, so I'm glad she did that. But Michaela, I understand we are growing. The podcast is growing. So tell us a little bit. We have some folks from other parts of the world.
Yeah.
No, tell us about it.
Okay, so I guess we can give these countries a shout out.
All right, let's just pick one country.
Brazil.
Hello, Brazil. Folks in Brazil, thank you for watching and listening to The Native Edge.
Yep, thank you. And Switzerland.
Switzerland, yes. Lots of nice, I bet there's nice weather in Switzerland this summer.
Oh,
I just have a feeling. What's another country we got going? Do we have anybody from New Zealand? Any New Zealanders?
We have New Zealand and we have Ireland.
Nice.
Yeah, we have Netherlands. Poland, France.
That's awesome.
And then our cousins in Canada.
Oh, good.
And Germany.
Nice.
Yeah,
So a lot, and of course Estonia, you said too.
Oh yeah, Estonia, Mexico, United Kingdom.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. So to all of our international listeners, watchers, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for tuning in. Feel free. We still get questions, and Michaela answers those questions individually. So if you have any questions for us or any ideas for a show that you'd like to see, send us a question, send us some information. We'll be happy to consider it, and definitely maybe one of the future podcasts we can have actually a question and answer session. That's always fun to do.
Ooh, yeah.
But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we have a very exciting show. You hear a lot of work that the National Center does, as well as a lot of our brother and sister organizations around policy and advocacy. So today we decided to bring two of our experts on policy that the National Center has been working with for a very long time. I'm going to let my guests introduce themselves, and we're going to get into a great conversation. So Kate, why don't you start with an introduction?
Okay. Well, I'm Kate Boyce, and I have been representing the National Center for over 30 years in Washington, D.C., up on Capitol Hill, within the federal agencies. I used to be a partner in a law firm, Patton Boggs. I formed my own firm about 10 years ago and continuing to represent the National Center. It's always been a great joy. When I was a partner in the law firm, I formed the Indian law practice at my firm, representing a number of tribes. I originally got into this representing Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. So I'm glad that the Eastern Band is led by, has the benefit of having the National Center lead the National,
Absolutely.
Chris James lead the National Center from Eastern Band. And it's just a labor of love. I've always enjoyed it.
Well, thank you and we'll get more in the details. I mean, how we met and that journey. Ryan, introduce yourself and welcome to the Native Edge.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name's Ryan Seelau. I've been with the National Center for a lot less time, just for, I think we're in 6 months now or so. But I'm currently an independent consultant that does law and policy work. I tell people usually I'm a lawyer by training, although I've worked in a lot of different spaces over the years. So for the last 20 years, I've worked in federal Indian law, international Indigenous rights, worked pretty much exclusively in different contexts. I started at the University of Arizona after law school. I went to their Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy program, where I began working with tribes in Arizona, as well as with the state and county governments on some projects. And then since then, I've been in kind of research spaces. I've been in legal spaces. I spent a couple of years abroad working with Chilean indigenous populations and the right to consultation that their government had just recognized at the time that I was there. And more recently, the last 5 or 6 years, I've been in Washington, D.C., working advocacy on the Hill with federal agencies, kind of a little bit of everything.
Oh, that's awesome. And so welcome, both of you. I know our listeners are like, boy, Chris loves to have lawyers on the show. I do like lawyers, and I do think having experts like yourselves just navigating policy and law. But let's start with Kate, because Kate, you sort of described, or you did describe, working with the National Center for the past 30 years, but also working with the Cherokee Nation. How did you get into working with tribes? And tell us a little bit about your story, because you've had a great career. I know you were doing stuff on the Hill, and get a little more detail on where you've came from.
Well, I was introduced to Indian law, representing Cherokee Nation Industries, which is still a vibrant government contracting company. And they were manufacturing wire and cable harness assemblies. And they had some government contracts claims our firm worked on, and I started helping the business with some work on the Hill. We fought the federal prison industries, which had a super preference and was basically taking contracts that the Cherokee Nation had been performing as a subcontractor. And so we fought the good fight there. It was almost like a David and Goliath effort. Mm-hmm.
And you were working, the chief at the time was Wilma Mankiller.
Right, she became chief. She was deputy chief when we first started working with her. When she was elected, she hired me and I represented the tribe for about 8.5 years, doing all of their federal policy and their Hill work. We also represented separately the Housing Authority and continued to represent the business, did a lot of government contract work for that tribal business and a lot of others. That was the time when the 8A program was being revised and revamped. And that's when tribes were included in the program, and some of those provisions that have benefited tribal and Alaska Native businesses and now Native Hawaiian organizations. One of the things I did working for Cherokee Nation is we established the Indian Incentive Program. We got that enacted into law. We got the regulations that finally developed at DOD. Got the provision amended a couple of times. We've gotten it funded every year. The National Center has taken that on as a major lift every year, and now the Native American Contractors Association also helps out. So I've worked a little bit in the government contracting space, a lot with Indian law and all kinds of different issues. I represented a number of Indian housing authorities and Indian health consortia, but my love has really been the economic and business development portfolio the National Center has.
And I talk a lot about relationships, how important relationships are. And when I moved to Washington, D.C. in 2009, you were one of my first meetings I had at the U.S. Department of Treasury. So you with representing the National Center, we had a meeting at Treasury, and so that was 16 years ago. So it's amazing that we still are having some of the same conversations that we had 16 years ago. But just having all that support and all the stuff you worked on, I really commend you, and you are really driving the train in a lot of these policy decisions nationwide. And we'll talk more about some of those policies. Ryan, I love that you were in Arizona, because a lot of our listeners are from Arizona. Tell us a little bit about you went into some detail about being in Arizona and working with the tribes. Tell us some of the work specifically that maybe you've done with some of the Arizona communities.
So yeah, like I said, I came to Arizona in 2005. So just after completing my law degree, and I actually started the 1-year LLM program at the University of Arizona, where I took a lot of federal Indian law classes, international Indigenous rights classes, and began working with tribes in Arizona. The first project I still remember, was a kind of a large project with all of the tribes in Arizona. It was because in 2005, at the time, it was right around the time that Hurricane Katrina had happened. And so FEMA and the state of Arizona and the tribal governments were all trying to figure out basically who had authority over if there were disasters of various kinds, whether that would be another natural disaster, whether that might be something related to like a biochemical weapon, something, all these different scenarios. And everyone sort of realized that there wasn't really structures in place to divide, who's the first responder, who has control over jurisdiction. So that was my sort of first project, was trying to map out all of these different regs, deal with all these different tribal codes and the state of Arizona code, and trying to come to some larger, understanding of who had power where. And then, from there, I did a lot of different little projects before I started working at the Native Nations Institute, which is connected to the University of Arizona there, and is the sister entity to the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development.
And that's Joan Tamici, which is a National Center board member, and Miriam Jorgensen, and they're pretty amazing people I've known through the years.
Absolutely. I worked with both of them, Joe Calt, Steve Cornell at the time as well. And I had a privilege to work on a project with our other colleague, Ian Record, where we put together the first sort of online distance learning course related to sovereignty and economic development. Had the privilege in that course of, over the course of several years, of meeting over 100 tribal leaders, including Wilma Mankiller, many others. So it was a really formative experience for me to be able to talk to all of these, high up people who had either been in tribal government spaces for decades, or people who are sort of on the cutting edge of policy and law, people who's were leading their tribes, kind of pushing the boundaries. It was really an amazing experience that kind of launched, I'd say, sort of my career into different directions. And I kind of went from there into, like I said, I went abroad for a few years and carried on some of that work abroad.
And talk a little bit about that journey, because I know working with Indigenous, as Michaela and I were talking about, we have populations all over the world that listen to us, but talk a little bit about that experience, because we're, each Indigenous population around the world, they're at different levels and getting recognized. So tell us a little bit about that process.
Sure. And it was a little bit of a, right place, right time, because when I was at the University of Arizona is when James Anaya was made the UN's International, I'm going to mess up the title, it's a long title, Rapporteur for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so he was, the first Native person from America that held the title. He was only the second person ever to hold that title at the UN. And so that kind of coincided with some of my time in Arizona. So he had lots of work happening in different places. I ended up in Chile because around that time I wanted to do something abroad for a little bit. And the Chilean government had just signed on to another international convention, ILO Convention 169, which gave their indigenous populations the right to consultation formally. So it was incorporated into their statutes at the same level as their constitution. And so I went down there to work primarily. I worked through a university with a human rights center, largely to do a bunch of rights education, which meant a lot of traveling all over the country, getting to meet the communities, talk to the community leaders, to talk about what does it mean to have this right? What does consultation mean? How do you make sure the government is being responsive to what you're doing? Also, the Chilean government, even though they had sort of passed this legislation and moved it forward, they also didn't really know what they were doing. So I ended up having lots of conversations with them as they tried to figure out how do we implement this right, bring it to practice. So it was a very rewarding experience, really interesting experience. Like you said, that even within the country, there's 9 major indigenous people groups in Chile. They're kind of in different spaces in terms of how much, they wouldn't use the word sovereignty, but how much sovereignty they're actually exercising, how much self-determination they're exercising, depending on kind of where they're at. Includes, Easter Island is also a part of Chile, so the Rapa Nui are also part of that process. It was really a lot of the groundwork to get into, a place where that right meant something and could be enforced.
That's awesome. And Kate, we talked, you mentioned a little bit about the Indian Loan Guarantee Program, which we still are advocating about, as you mentioned. Give us a little bit of background of why was that developed, and what does that program mean, and why is it important for people to know about it?
Okay, well, the program was developed long before I got involved in Indian law, but it was established in the Indian Finance Act sometime after 1974. And it was basically to provide a loan. It was to encourage private lenders to lend in Indian country. And it was a more generous loan guarantee than, say, the SBA's. I think the SBA is 85% guarantee. That's the total they can guarantee of a loan. The Indian loan guarantee is 90%, but the program has to, the loan has to benefit either a tribal lands or on or near and benefit a tribal community. And it still it has encouraged some banks, the Native American Bank, which is owned by, I think now 33 different tribes and ANCs are invested in that bank. And there's some banks, Key Bank, which I know is a supporter of the National Center, and some of the other banks have participated in that program, but it's still a very limited number of private sector banks that even lend in Indian country. Quite a few of them are Native-owned banks. But the program is unique. It's got simpler underwriting criteria than the SBA loan guarantee, and a simpler application and so forth. There are fees attached to it, and there's a fairly significant equity requirement. You have to have up to 20% equity in the project, which is sometimes very difficult to meet. There are different ways of meeting that requirement. But it's it's unique to Indian country. It's been proposed for elimination because there was some thought that it was duplicative. It is not. Yeah. And I was really delighted to see that the House Interior Appropriations Committee basically supported the request that the National Center submitted on behalf of itself and the Native CDFI Network, NFOA, NCAIED, $25 million with a fairly substantial administrative expense addition. Yeah. That could potentially allow $450 million worth of private financing to be guaranteed, which is really a wonderful, it's the highest level that I've seen authorized. But frankly, the underlying statute authorizes a total of I think it's $1.6 billion that could be subject to loan. So it's way below, the financing has been way below what it could be. And it doesn't take very much federal money for the credit subsidy. Yeah. It's always been there's been a huge return on investment. Sometimes as much as 1 in 15, $15 of private financing for every dollar of the loan guarantee. So it's a great program, and I'm really glad the House has endorsed it, and I hope the Senate will as well this year.
You know, that program's great. They also opened the availability to community development financial institutions to use that program. That was probably 10, 15 years ago they did that. And, having those CDFIs able to use the program too can help with their lending and spur lending. So it's a great program. And, sometimes we hear, and I'll ask both of you this question, sometimes we do hear that word duplicative programs. As we start navigating, talk a little bit about, and I'll let you start, Ryan, just from your perspective, when you hear the word duplicative programs, what do you sort of think when you hear that?
I think maybe the cynic in me thinks that someone's looking for a way to cut the budget. I think the problem, maybe the problem with that terminology, or for the people that are using that terminology, they're frequently looking at a very surface level of how the programs operate, or possibly even just reading the budget line titles.
Yeah.
And a lot of the titles do admittedly sound very similar to one another. And even if you read some of the program or project descriptions, a sentence or two in, you may think, oh, this is essentially, this over here in this agency and this over here in this agency are essentially doing the same thing. But I won't say always, but almost always, there's a very good reason why those programs both exist. They could be serving different populations. They may be, have different criteria for accessing the programs, different eligible participants, whatever it might be. And I think a lot of times, that's where I guess advocacy is useful, is to come in and say, these things aren't the same. This is what's actually going to get cut if you eliminate this program, or even if you try to combine these programs. These are the issues you're going to create. In many cases, you're recreating issues that were solved by possibly splitting the programs or creating the new program in the first place.
Yeah.
I was going to add a lot of advocacy that I've done over the years for Indian country, but I think it's probably true for other people who advocate for Indian country, is that you're constantly trying to explain that the federal government, in trying to address in a paternalistic way the issues in Indian country, have taken an existing program that was designed not at all for Indian country and trying to make it apply to Indian country. And it's like pounding a round peg in a square hole, or vice versa. Going back to the loan guarantee program, for example, there have been very few SBA loan guarantees in Indian country. So that's one reason why it's not duplicative. But we've also tried very hard to get some of the programs tailored to Indian country, the kinds of programs the National Center provides for business and procurement technical assistance, because the challenges are so much different in Indian country, particularly in the lending space, but that also relates to business development because, for example, a lot of people who want to start a business, they use their personal home and their land as collateral for their first loan. Well, you can't get a loan, you can't use trust land as collateral because it's inalienable. That's part of the trust responsibility of the federal government. Only the federal government can decide whether or not that land can be transferred.
Right.
So it's, there are benefits and detriments to trust land, but I'll let Ryan address that if he wants to. But I think that it's always better to have programs designed for Indian country, to serve Indian country, that's tailored to its needs. That's why consultation is so important. And I want to tee off of something that you said, Ryan, because I didn't know that you'd been in Chile. One of the things I did over my time as a lawyer was I did some pro bono work for the Kuna Indians in Panama. It was sort of work similar to what I had done for Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, where we were trying to, in litigation, get compensation for the riverbed lands that had been taken by the state government. And similar in Panama, they had dammed a river and flooded all of this Aboriginal indigenous land in order to create water and electricity for Panama City. And they'd always promised the Kuna that they would compensate them for the loss of their property. And it was just like the treaties in the United States, not honored. particularly
A lot of
well.
broken promises
Right.
all over the world.
But it's interesting because in Panama, the whole archipelago of 360 islands, the San Blas Islands, that those are all, that's the Cuna Reservation. It's called what do they call it? Comarca. There is their reservation, but they have their own government and their own land. But I don't know to what extent they actually consult with the Panamanian government.
Well, consultation is so important, throughout the world. I mean, we see so many examples. And when I say consultation in the United States, I truly believe in government consultation. But also, I believe that a lot of our corporations should be doing consultation. I use Standing Rock as a pretty good example of a lot of folks did not consult with the tribe or have conversations with the tribe when they're developing projects. So not all these issues would have been solved, but even some basic conversation, even at the early beginning, would have solved a lot of issues that companies have. Very similar probably to what both of you have worked on internationally. I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about just direct policy. At the end of 2024, the National Center was instrumental in putting together some briefs, one for the congressional brief and one for the administration brief. The three of us worked on it along with Ian Recker, and we got 15 other organizations to join these briefs. Kate, why don't you talk a little bit, just very high level, about the congressional brief, and then Ryan, if you could talk high level on the admin brief. So, Kate.
Right. Well, we, I'm sorry that Ian Record isn't able to join us today. Because
he's here in spirit because his name's been said 4 times. So, Ian, when you're listening to this.
It was probably his brainchild, but and along with Chris, I should give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, please give a little credit to.
But basically, we took the high level policy requests, positions that about a dozen different national and regional Native organizations were espousing, and condensed them to a quick description and an ask.
Yeah.
And we had one for the Congress and one for the administration, and it was geared first to the Biden administration because the Biden administration was still in office.
Yep.
And it was carried by the various participating organizations to meetings on the Hill and so forth, and I think it was helpful. Then it enabled us to have something that we could transition for the Trump administration. So we did something similar for as a transition piece for the Trump administration, both on terms of administrative requests and also congressional requests.
And Ryan, pick up right there on the Trump side, Trump administration side, and talk a little bit about that process and putting together. And then also, why don't you talk about some of the work that we're doing even now with some of the coalitions?
Certainly. So I think, policy work is equal parts reading the calendar and then kind of divining the tea leaves type of place, right? So there's certain things that are always going to happen. We knew there was going to be an election. We knew there was going to be inauguration day. We knew there was going to be appointments. And so trying to figure out on the administration brief, figuring out what are the things that, collectively Indian country and the tribal organizations and tribal nations that are engaged in advocacy, what are the things that, we thought the Trump administration would prioritize based on the campaign, based on sort of early steps, based on the last time the Trump administration was there, and trying to put those things together. There'd been a lot of, and they were different than some of the things that we would have done had the Biden administration won. And that's because, the parties have different priorities and there's different opportunities. So it's really trying to weigh out those pieces, but always moving forward with pieces of advocacy that there's great consensus around. Which I think kind of gets to your second point, some of the work that's been happening since, the National Center has been heavily involved and was one of the sort of early members of what's become known as the Coalition for Tribal Sovereignty. I've just messed up the name, CTS, Coalition for Tribal Sovereignty, which is what it sounds like. It's not an organization, it's a coalition of organizations that do advocacy on behalf of tribal nations and tribal citizens all over the country. And it's, a way to try and produce more meaningful advocacy materials and educational materials for the government, so that things can move forward. And where you don't have to use, when you have, it's up to almost 35 or 39 organizations that are part of the coalition now, and you can do a lot when you kind of combine some of these resources, the messaging amongst all the organizations, and it has a larger, bigger megaphone when you use something like that, like a coalition work. And I think all advocacy in DC is coalition based, either formally or informally. But the Coalition for Tribal Sovereignty has been able, since the beginning of the Trump administration, to really try to respond quickly to an administration that has moved very quickly. So it's a new coalition, kind of for a new moment in history.
Right.
And this is something all three of us are involved with at different levels. And I think that coalition is so important because one, we don't always agree on every topic. I want to make that very clear. With so many organizations, we're not going to agree on everything, and we're not going to also advocate for everything that each one of us. But there are enough policy recommendations and enough things that are happening that we do have a pretty good voice. And it's a big education piece too, because a lot of the work we do is just education and just explaining to, for example, even people in various administration positions, they don't really understand the difference between a tribe and a tribal organization and networking through that and the benefit of what is sovereignty sometimes. They don't quite understand what is the difference between a tribe that has land and a tribe that's landless. So there's a lot of things that we talk about and advocate for as a group that's really important. Kate, why don't we even get a little more in the weeds? I know that we have been we have Apex Center, that the National Center services over 30 states. The Apex Center, Apex Accelerators is what it's called. We support procurement and tribal citizens as well as tribes entering into the procurement with the federal government. We can support that with probably over 1,000 clients we work with. But tell us a little bit about what's happening now with that program, because I know we've met with some folks on the Hill today, specifically on that program. We both met with Representative Crane's office and Senator Kelly's office today. So maybe talk a little bit about what we're trying to advocate for on that side.
Okay, great. Well, so the National Center is the longest serving. It's the oldest Apex Accelerator. They used to be called Procurement Technical Assistance Centers, and because that's what they are. But now they're called Apex Accelerators, and it was the National Center had the first one. It was the National Center actually that came up with the idea of an incentive payment, and got language authorizing that program. So it's actually came from the National Center. I just happened to get it funded.
Yeah, that's great.
in a different for a different client, but I've always helped the National Center expand that program because it's such an important program. It helps tribes, individual tribal members start businesses, the Alaska Natives as well, and Native Hawaiians as well, but get into government contracting, which is a difficult area to
is not easy.
Penetrate.
Yeah.
And we've worked pretty well. I think the National Center's worked pretty well with the Department of Defense and different entities that have managed that program. And we've pressed them to allow the Native Apex Accelerators to train their clients, not just to serve the federal government for their procurement needs, but also state, local, and tribal governments. So now the Apex Accelerators can help individual tribes fulfill their requirements for goods and services. The National Center's Apex Accelerator, as you've mentioned, has the largest territory of all the Southwest and the Eastern Seaboard, 33 states. Yet their eligibility for funding under the program is less than a statewide. There are about 95 of these Apex Accelerators across the country. Each state has one. There's some localized ones that get less funding. But for years, and I think we were probably instrumental in getting this to be in parity with a statewide accelerator. So we used to be eligible for the same level as a statewide, even though we serve 33 states. In 1922, when the statewide cap was raised for funding eligibility, they forgot to include the Native Apex Accelerator. So we've been working 2022.
Okay, yes.
So we've been working for a number of years to fix that, and then the Association of all the Apex Accelerators has agreed that that was an oversight. So finally today, we learned that both the House and Senate have language in the National Defense Authorization Bill raising that eligibility. So that's a win.
Yeah.
We also got the language in defense appropriations to fund those centers, so that's also a win. So that's exciting.
Yep.
In addition to funding the Indian Incentive Program, as I mentioned, which is a really important. It's a marketing tool that tribal and Native-owned companies can use to say, if you subcontract work to our company, we can avail you of a 5% incentive for having done so. That's paid not out of the contract, but out of the separate pot of money.
That's great. That's great news. And Ryan, let's talk a little bit on some of the work. I know you were just recently on a worker bee, you and Kate both, or they call it a worker bee coalition call. Talk about some of the work that you've been doing and actually leading with that coalition.
Yes, yeah. Kate and I left the quote worker bee unquote call just to come down here and to be in this conversation. The coalition has been, I think, getting back to one of the things you said about how Indian country is constantly having to educate representatives, federal agencies, et cetera. I think one of the strongest things the coalition has been able to do, and probably one of the things that's collectively saved the most kind of time across the organizations, is that education piece, is coming together with all these different subject matter experts, including the National Center, and weighing in on saying, what do we want these agencies to understand? What do we want these federal appointees to understand? How do we get it so that we're not waiting 2 or 3 years before they finally kind of know enough to talk to Indian country? And so putting together, letters, putting together meetings, offering resources to the Hill and to the federal agencies, I think have been one of the, critically valuable pieces. I think if you had, I don't know, I'm guessing, but I think if you had asked a lot of the executive directors like yourself where they thought Indian country might be 6 months into the administration, I think most would say that we're further along. The dialogue is actually further along than we thought it might be, that there's been more good conversations and more positive change because of it.
Right. I think that the fundamental purpose of the coalition, why it was put together in the first place, was the recognition that all of the Indian program funding could get wiped away from the misunderstanding that it was some sort of racial classification.
Right.
So the fundamental purpose of the coalition is to assert tribal sovereignty and explain and educate to the members of the administration and all the new members on the Hill, in which you have to do every time there's a congressional election, is that tribal governments are in the Constitution. They are co-equal sovereigns with state and federal government, and that's where the basis, the foundation of consultation comes from, the government-to-government relationship, and that the tribes prepaid for the federal funds that they receive now under federal programs because of the treaty obligation. They gave up lands and resources, and the federal government made promises for this kind of support.
And I think, I think it maybe is important not to undersell sort of that moment. So, I want to be clear, the Constitution, the treaties, 250 years of case law, all are very clear about what tribal sovereignty is, about what the tribal government's rights to exercise that sovereignty. But in a very real sense, in the early days of this administration, because they were responding to the diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI policies from the previous administration, there was sort of an existential crisis of a moment where it wasn't clear which direction they were going to go, whether they were going to kind of take all of the tribal sovereignty pieces and just lump it in with DEI. And I think it took the collective effort of Indian country and educating and advocacy to just make sure that everyone understood those pieces. And I think if Indian country had been quieter or more silent, it's not entirely clear what would have happened. Although we know that some of the, initially, we know what did happen is tribal programs got swept up in everything else. And so
funding programs frozen and so forth.
So we have an idea of where maybe was going to be headed, but there's been a lot of success through the efforts. It's not just the efforts of the coalition, but that was one of the priorities of the coalition, and one of the reasons why it was founded was to try and make sure that this was sort of the biggest threat in the last several decades, at least, to that idea of tribal sovereignty, and make sure that the administration and Congress and everyone understood those pieces.
Well, and this all, there was several leaders involved. United Southern and Eastern Tribes with Kiki, Larry Wright with NCAI, NFOA was involved now with Corey, and NAC has been involved with Quentin. I've been involved, and there's so many others too that have been involved. So it's really great to see that coalition started, but it was really Kiki and you said that really started laying the groundwork, and I really commend that leadership, and great to see, but also bringing everybody together. So really great work. I know an hour goes by super fast, but I do, as we start wrapping up, I know you don't have a crystal ball, Ryan or Kate, or a magic wand, but as you start thinking about I'll just say for the next couple of years, what are some of the things that you feel will continue to work on policy-wise, or what would you like to work on, or what would you like to see happening? So I'm going to put you on the spot first, Ryan, and where would you like to take the work that we've done and take it to the next level?
I think there's still going to be. I don't have a crystal ball. I will say that first.
I know. I wish we had crystal balls, and then we would know exactly how to answer this question.
I think there's going to have to. I think there's going to have to be a continuation of the efforts that have started. The continuation of education and what it means to what tribal sovereignty means and what it means to engage in real economic development in Indian country. But I think there are opportunities, and I think I'm hesitant to say that there's not going to be more fights ahead than there have been already, but I think there are opportunities, to align with the priorities of the administration, the priorities of Congress. The funding bills that have come out just recently do seem positive. That there is actual, there's a certain amount of consensus that Indian country is a place where there's a high. In addition to the trust and treaty obligations that need to be funded, there is a high return on investment and opportunities to strengthen local and regional and state economies. So I think keeping that work going forward, making sure that the large-scale development can happen, but that tribal nations are at the table making sure that if it's happening on their lands or in their sacred sites or in their backyards, that they have a clear say in how that's going to happen.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say self-governance is one of the big principles and issues that this Coalition for Tribal Sovereignty is promoting, which is sort of consistent with the Trump administration's interests as well. I think I'd like to see more effort on business and economic development. I think this would be something that it was supported by the first Trump administration. I think it would be here. But what I'm concerned about especially in terms of the National Center, is that you serve tribes in Alaska Native. You serve the governments, the tribal governments, but you also serve the individual Native businesses. And I think there are programs that have been beneficial to them that are really at risk. The 8A program is one of them. Some of the SBA contracting programs. They've already done away with some of the disadvantaged business utilization programs of the Department of Transportation. So I think all the more need for Indian country to have the National Center there providing the business and procurement technical assistance. And I hope that there will continue to be program support for that, because it's so necessary and so helpful. Because all of the tribes that have been successful in their government contracting and other tribal businesses have had overflow benefits to the surrounding communities in the states. And that is part of the message that the coalition is promoting, and some of the organizations have got to continue to promote, because it's true, and it helps everybody. It rises all boats.
Yeah, absolutely. And that trickle-down effect is so important in our community, especially in rural America, where a lot of our communities are the number one employer in that area, or the number one driver of economic development. And they're doing some really innovative things around the country. So I appreciate both of your thoughts on that. I'm sorry we don't have that crystal ball. I know that the three of us, including Ian, will continue to work on advocacy and continue to build on our policy and our collaboration. I mean, collaboration is so key to bringing so many voices together to really have one voice. Talk a little bit, and this is the one thing that's happening now, and maybe as we start looking at the future. I know NAFOA did a tax. We went to a tax event this week with NAFOA, talking about some legislative there. I sort of see that's a big push that we've been pushing on certain parts of that
for years.
And it seems like the ball continues to move. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
And what's happening here this week in DC?
I think yes, there was two briefings on the tribal investment tax bill. I'll have to call it. I don't know what its formal name is, but it's been reintroduced in the Senate. It's supposed to be reintroduced in the House. They may be in different forms, but it's so important. It's sort of a catch-all of the various tax provisions that the tribes have been trying to get passed since the very, very first effort was undertaken in 1978, I think, when the tribal tax parity legislation was promoted by then Senator Inouye. To make it easier for tribal governments to issue governmental bonds, which would be, it's a way that the state and local governments finance so many of their projects, and there are very restrictive provisions for tribes, and those need to be removed. There are provisions to expand the new market tax credit for tribes, the low-income housing tax credits. Some of the adoption provisions have already been included in the reconciliation bill, but that was the only one in that big bill that passed Congress. But so this package is very important, and we just have to keep advocating for it, because there are not very many tax bills that pass, and we really have to keep pushing for it.
And I think all three of us agree, because people may be listening to this and be like, wow, how do I find out more information, or how do I get involved? So there's a coalition website, is that right, Ryan?
That's correct.
Okay, and we can put that on the podcast event. The National Center has a policy website as well, so there's lots of information there. And everyone has a voice. I say that a whole lot. You don't have to be in Washington, D.C. to advocate. You can be back home. You can write letters. You can reach out to your representative, congressional representative. You can reach out to your senators, and you have a voice. So if you believe you want to support these programs, just a simple letter or phone call is huge to help
or
out.
Emails,
yeah.
And amazing thing that the COVID pandemic did was make everybody used to having Zoom meetings.
calls, yeah.
So you don't have to come to Washington anymore
right.
to have meetings with your congressman or at least the staff of the congressmen, congresswomen, senators, and so that's a very important. And emails, you can email them. You can go on their website and send your messages. And so there's a lot easier way now to communicate your views.
I really appreciate Kate and Ryan for joining me. You both have done some amazing work through the years. What great advocates for, 15, 20 years, 30 years of really supporting programs to help economic development in our communities. And I really appreciate the work we do together, and it's fun. I enjoy it, and I know that we're supporting our communities, and it's so important. So thank you both for doing the work you do every day, and thank you both for being on the Native Edge podcast. I'm Chris James. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Native Edge podcast. The National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The funds that we bring into the National Center goes right back into our communities to support business growth, economic development, tourism, exporting, and policy. So I really appreciate your support. I really appreciate you tuning in to the Native Edge. Until next time, on the Native Edge.